US launches Freedom.gov to bypass European censorship. The internet is fracturing, not with a bang but with a series of quiet policy decisions, legal frameworks, and government portals that are slowly dividing the digital world into competing spheres of influence. And the latest move in this geopolitical chess match is something the United States government has actually done, launching a platform designed to push American free speech values directly into countries where those values are increasingly being treated as a threat. The platform is called Freedom.gov, and depending on where you stand politically, ideologically, or geographically, it is either the most important digital initiative of the decade or a provocative act of information warfare, dressed up in the language of liberty. What it actually is, though, is far more complicated than either of those framings, and understanding it requires stepping back and looking at how we got here in the first place. For the past several years, Europe has been building what many supporters call the world's most sophisticated digital regulatory ecosystem. The Digital Services Act, the Digital Markets Act, the AI Act. These are sweeping pieces of legislation designed to hold platforms accountable for the content they host, the algorithms they use, and the market power they accumulate. European regulators have levied billions in fines against American tech companies. They have forced platforms to remove content, label posts, restrict certain advertising practices, and submit to audits that would have been unthinkable in the American regulatory environment even 5 years ago. From Brussels, this looks like progress. It looks like democratic societies finally asserting control over entities that had grown too powerful, too opaque, and too indifferent to public harm. From Washington, particularly under the current political climate, it looks like something very different. It looks like censorship with a bureaucratic face. It looks like governments deciding what speech is permissible, which ideas are dangerous, and which voices deserve amplification or suppression. And the argument being made, loudly and with increasing institutional backing, is that American citizens, American companies, and frankly anyone in the world who wants access to uncurated American-style discourse should not have to live under those rules. Freedom.gov is the formalization of that argument. The platform, as described by the officials who announced it, is designed to serve as a hub, a kind of digital embassy for free expression. It will host content, commentary, and media that may be restricted or filtered on mainstream platforms, operating under European regulatory pressure. It will provide tools and resources for journalists, activists, and ordinary users who feel that their speech has been suppressed by platform policies that are themselves responses to governmental mandates. And it will operate under American legal jurisdiction, meaning that the speech protections baked into the First Amendment will govern what appears there, not the hate speech laws of Germany, not the misinformation frameworks being developed in France, and not the content moderation standards that the EU's Digital Services Act requires of large platforms. The symbolism here is enormous. The United States government is essentially building a parallel information infrastructure and saying, explicitly, that the rules being written in Europe do not apply to it. That is not a subtle move. That is a statement of intent, and the Europeans have already begun responding to it. Senior EU officials have called the platform a vector for disinformation. Digital policy experts in Berlin and Paris have raised concerns that Freedom.gov could become a safe harbor for exactly the kind of content that European frameworks were designed to address: coordinated manipulation campaigns, health misinformation, election interference narratives, extremist recruitment. The argument is not entirely without merit. When you build a platform explicitly designed to host content that other platforms have removed, you are going to attract some of that content. That is not a hypothetical. That is a near certainty. But here is where the debate gets genuinely interesting, and where you cannot simply accept either side's framing at face value. The European regulatory system, for all its noble intentions, has produced outcomes that even many liberal critics find troubling. Platforms operating in the EU have over-moderated aggressively because the penalties for leaving harmful content up are severe and clear, while the penalties for removing legitimate speech are vague or non-existent. The incentive structure pushes towards suppression. Journalists covering sensitive political topics have found their work flagged. Satirists have had posts removed. Academics studying extremism have had their research-related content taken down, because automated systems cannot distinguish between documenting hate speech and promoting it. The European regulatory environment has also, quietly and without much fanfare, made it easier for governments themselves to request content removal. And while those governments are democracies, the principle that governments should be able to shape the information environment, even through platform intermediaries, is one that has historically not ended well when extended beyond its original stated purpose. So where does that leave Freedom.gov? It is a response to a real problem, built in a way that will create new ones. The free speech values it invokes are genuine and worth defending. The specific political context in which it has been launched, and the specific actors who will benefit most from its existence are considerably more complicated. The current American administration has been clear about which voices it considers unfairly suppressed. They are not primarily dissident academics or investigative journalists facing takedowns. They are political commentators, media figures, and content creators whose content has been restricted because platforms, responding partly to regulatory pressure and partly to their own community standards, determined it violated policies on harassment, coordinated inauthentic behavior, or health misinformation. The administration frames all of those restrictions as political censorship. The platforms and their European regulators frame them as responsible content governance. Both of those framings contain partial truths, and that is precisely what makes this moment so difficult to navigate clearly. The deeper issue is that the internet was never supposed to have a government. That was the founding mythology, a decentralized network resistant to control, national borders, and centralized authority. That mythology has been eroding for 20 years. China built its Great Firewall. Russia has progressively isolated its internet infrastructure. Europe built a regulatory superstructure. And now the United States, the country that built the open internet and exported it to the world as a model of liberal democratic values, is building its own walled garden, except this one is labeled freedom, which makes it significantly harder to criticize without sounding like you are against freedom itself. That is smart politics. It may not be smart policy. What happens next is not hard to predict in broad strokes. European regulators will attempt to block or restrict access to Freedom.gov within EU member states, which will immediately generate headlines about European governments censoring an American government website, which will then validate every argument the platform's creators are making about European censorship. It is almost a self-fulfilling dynamic. The moment Europe tries to limit access to a platform called Freedom.gov, they have handed its architects the most powerful marketing campaign imaginable. Meanwhile, the content ecosystem around the platform will begin to take shape, and that ecosystem will define what Freedom.gov actually is in practice versus what it claims to be in principle. If it becomes a serious home for investigative journalism, political commentary across the ideological spectrum, and genuinely suppressed speech from around the world, it will be hard to dismiss. If it becomes a repository for the specific content that was removed from mainstream platforms for specific documented harms, that will tell a different story entirely. The battle over the internet's future is no longer being fought exclusively by hackers, platforms, and privacy advocates. It is now being fought by governments openly using the language of rights and freedom and security and sovereignty, and each of those governments believes with complete sincerity that it is the one defending the good version of the internet against the bad one. What nobody seems willing to say plainly is that there may not be a good version available anymore. The open global internet that everyone claims to want, free, accessible, resistant to manipulation, protective of both expression and dignity, may simply not be a stable equilibrium. It may require trade-offs that no political framework, American or European, has been honest enough to fully articulate to the people who use it every day. Freedom.gov is the latest proof of that. It is a government-built free speech platform, which is a phrase that should give everyone pause, regardless of which government built it and regardless of which speech it claims to be freeing. The question worth sitting with is not whether free speech is good. It obviously is. The question is whether a government portal, built for political purposes, operated under a particular administration's definition of what speech deserves protection, is actually the thing that free speech needs right now. That answer is much less obvious, and anyone telling you otherwise is probably selling something,